Well, hey everyone, welcome to this week's Chasing Giants episode. And remember, this week we will start airing the videos from Shipshawana's Midwest Sportsman's Classic. If you're listening on an audio platform, remember that the first release, which will be the Wenzel Brothers, will be at the conclusion of this episode. So stay tuned for a second hour if you're on an audio platform to hear that. If you're watching on a video platform, it's just the podcast and Sunday Night Prayer Time, and the Shipshawana Show segment will air midweek this week on Chasing Giants TV, either Wednesday or Thursday. So here comes the show.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome to the June 1st edition of Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer, brought to you by Osseo Gear. Already June, episode 275. The spring is almost over, summer being here. We got a lot to talk about today, Don.
Yes, we do. Finally got my food plots planted, though, but it's been one thing after another this spring, and I don't even know where to begin. First of all, I got done planting my soybean plots and my grain sorghum and pulled the pH drill into the shed, and I realized after I'd planted that I had the depth set at 2 inches, as deep as it'll go. Well, I knew that was going to be a problem, and, after about 10 days of very, very few soybeans popping up, I knew I needed to replant. So Saturday I replanted all my beans and replanted my grain sorghum plot. So I got to use double the seed that I needed with 2 plantings.
That sounds like something I would do because I get in a hurry.
Yep.
And I got a very small window of time and I rush and I don't stop and double check stuff. That sounds like something I would do.
Well, I'll never make that mistake again. I usually got to do everything wrong at least once, and then that teaches me to never do it again. So, lesson learned.
If you haven't been watching Chasing Giants TV, there's already been a soybean and a corn planting video, a herbicide video just within the last week about your food plots. So make sure you're following along with that. We got some new content coming this coming week, including a common mistake. While we're talking about mistakes, a video talking about herbicides, chemicals, and cleaning out your sprayer. It happens every year. We get the calls, we get the text messages, somebody accidentally killed their plot.
It never fails, and that's a mistake you make once, and you usually don't make it again. But I want to hit on something real quick, Terry. Mike's Mighty Micros. Guys, if you're going to be using that to spray on anything, you guys need to get a sprayer, a little hand pump-up garden sprayer, dedicated just to that. Don't take one of your old sprayers. Go get a brand new one dedicated only to Mike's Mighty Micros and use that to spray your fruit trees, your whatever, your gardens, whatever.
Right. We even got a question about how to mix it with the types of water later in the show, but that's a great point, Don. If you're spraying your herbicide with your big sprayer, say you got a 4-wheeler sprayer, UTV, or even up to a boom sprayer that runs off PTO like your big one, you can add the mics into that herbicide. But if you're just using it to spray your fruit trees, your vegetables, your wife's flowers, don't cross-pollinate any of that. You can dump your mics into the herbicide tank, but when you're only spraying mics, I bought one of those hand pump sprayers, a 1.5 gallon pump sprayer at Harbor Freight 2 weeks ago for I think $13.99 cheap.
Yeah, there's no sense taking a chance because you don't realize how little residue it takes in a sprayer to kill plants, and especially when you add something like Mike's Mighty Micros in there, it almost makes that chemical hotter, and you can actually get by with less herbicide when you do that. So we had a couple of different people reach out this week and come to find out they hadn't cleaned their sprayers out.
Yeah, we're not picking on just one because it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the other thing is people pick the wrong herbicide for the wrong product. And, they go to the lawn and garden aisle at Lowe's or Tractor Supply and get a bottle of Roundup Max concentrate that has a second residual or second herbicide in it versus just getting straight, glyphosate. So, guys, it's easy to do, and man, I'm sure it makes people's stomach turn when it happens.
Yep, I've made that mistake in the past, and will hopefully never make it again. Learn the hard way.
Yeah. I talked to Mike actually today. I called him. We're going to talk a little bit about another side effect of a cold, wet spring in a little bit, but I talked to Mike today, and we were talking about it, and he said, even if you mix it hot, it's not going to kill something. It might turn the leaves, but it'll bounce back with a vengeance when it does. But folks, when you're shopping for this, remember that pump sprayer is a gallon and a half that you're using for your garden. All you're doing is misting your fruit trees with it. You're not spraying a gallon per tree on there. And you only use 1 ounce per gallon of water. So this stuff lasts. I mean, it's cheap for how long you use it and how many dosages you can get it. But, you don't have to buy the 2.5 gallon container to just spray your wife's rose bushes. If you're spraying it to your food plots, get the bigger jug. But, follow those instructions. You only mix it 1 ounce per gallon of water.
In a clean sprayer.
Clean sprayer. Very important. There will be a video, I believe, on Tuesday coming out, if it doesn't before this podcast releases, about cleaning out your sprayer and different herbicides. But we're going to talk, before the Ossia break, I want to talk about another thing that came up this week about another side effect of a cold, wet spring. And when we come back from the Ossia break, you and I are going to do what we teased up a couple weeks or maybe even a month ago. And that is go over the properties that we had at the top of our list, our most favorite properties. We're going to do that this episode. So we both had something happen this week that we noticed that's another side effect of a cold, wet spring. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so about 10 days ago, I sprayed Mighty Micros on all my fruit trees. I had my second year fruit orchard that I planted last spring. I'll tell you what, a month ago, it looked absolutely fabulous. I mean, it looked fantastic. Those trees did for the second year. And I did everything right last year. I amended the soil when I backfilled the holes, and I put mulch around each one and all that. But then 2 things happened. First, there's one stinking deer on my farm. I know it's one deer doing it all. I've always picked those cages up off the ground about a foot or so. Well, there's one deer that's been sticking its head underneath that cage, and then it picks it up and it bends the wire up, and it's got its head underneath in the cage. Its body's outside, its head in there, and it's done it to every stinking tree in that orchard. So they just took a great-looking orchard, and that deer made it look terrible and actually probably killed a couple of those trees. But then this week I go back 10 days after spraying Mike's for the first time, and I got 2 trees that are just totally dead brown almost. And I've got a handful of others that have branches on them that are turning brown. Not the whole tree, but individual branches. And man, I was disgusted. And I called Mike and I'm like, what's going on here? I sprayed your stuff 10 days ago and now my trees are all dying. And
I think you made him sick.
Yeah.
I think he threw up when you called him.
Well, he wanted to see pictures and everything, and he just couldn't believe it because he's been spraying his orchard all these years. He says, there's been times where I've just, as an experiment, I've mixed that stuff 5 times hotter than it's supposed to be, and he says, I never did that on my trees, but he said I did it on some clover and stuff just to see if it would kill it, and it did not, but he doesn't recommend you do that, by the way. But anyway, I sent him pictures, and what's wrong with my trees is they've got fire blight. And it's really, on my farm, I've noticed it in pear trees a lot more than apples in the past. But the way to notice it, and we can post a picture on here, Terry, that I've taken, the end of the branch, Mike called it, it turns into a shepherd's hook. So instead of being straight, it hooks.
Looks like a candy cane.
Yeah, I know exactly what it looks like. I mean, because I've seen it on my pear trees in the past. The branches and everything just turns black. The branches will turn black. The leaves turn brown to black, and the whole branch will die or the whole tree can die. So here's the interesting thing, though, about all this. So when I planted that orchard last year, I got some of Jay Gingrich's disease-resistant trees, the Andy apple trees, but I also got a bunch of trees from another nursery, and a good reputable nursery and all that, but these other apple trees are all the ones that have it. There's not one tree from Jay that's got this blight, and it's because of what Andy's done for disease resistance. So there's a huge lesson here, folks. I mean, if you're just going to Walmart and getting apple trees because they're on clearance and they're cheap, or the local farm store or wherever, or you're just taking a big risk. And I'll tell you, I'll be 62 years old this summer, and this whole orchard, I've just lost 2 years from that one stinking deer, but also to that fire blight. So, Mike suggested cutting all that fire blight out, whether it's the whole tree or the branches that are turning brown, and burn that wood, because he said it's very, very contagious. It'll just spread through your whole property, your orchard. And I said, I'm not doing that at all. I said, it's going to be survival of the fittest on my farm. I want them to die. If they're going to die, let's do it now, because I'm going to go in this fall. I'm going to get with Jay and get some of his potted apple trees that he's potted up this spring and got under drip irrigation growing all summer. And whatever dies this summer, let's just get it over with. Let's find out which ones are disease resistant, which ones are not.
Right.
And then I'll just replace them this fall. And then I've got some new wire ordered for my cages to keep this stinking deer out. And all I can say is if I'm sitting there this fall near that plot and I see a deer doing that, I don't care. If it's a 3-year-old buck with a world of potential, he's getting an arrow stuck through him. I've never had that happen. I've been doing this for years and years and years, making these cages the very same way, and I never, ever had a problem. And then one deer comes along and hits every sinking tree in the whole orchard.
I bet it's an old nanny doe.
I'm guessing it's probably a doe, too, but she just sticks her head down under that cage and just raises it up and bends the cage up and eats the apple trees.
You never know, though. It could be your super doe, super genetics that's making your big bucks. You never know.
Well, I don't know which doe that is. I can't tell them apart, but I'll tell you what, if I see a doe doing that and she's in range, she's in trouble.
Well, for the folks, if you're watching this, I will have put some pictures up on the screen to help identify it. Number one, what we're saying is fire blight. According to the people we've talked to this week, I have it on two of my pear trees. My apple trees from Jay do not have it. But like you said, it turn brown, and I got a picture on the screen right now. The limb looks like a candy cane, shepherd's hook. If you want to do a different plan of action than what Don is saying, when you identify that, cut it out or pull the tree and get it somewhere and burn it. You don't want it taking over the rest of it. You're using a completely different strategy, but if you want to try to contain it and save what you can, that's what Mike's recommendation is. But it's another side effect of this cold, wet spring that we're dealing with.
Yeah, so apples originate from Kazakhstan or one of them stand countries where it's a whole lot more arid than it is in the United States. And all the diseases that have to do that our apples are susceptible to are due to cold, wet, damp conditions. And you get high humidity, and like we've had this spring with all the rain and everything, they become really susceptible to diseases like this. But I can't stress enough, guys, if you're going to go to all the trouble and the expense to plant a fruit orchard on your farm, just do it right the first time. Don't waste. I mean, just think if this would have happened 5 years down the road for me when I'm 66 or 67 instead of now. I mean, none of us want to waste years, but when you get my age, it becomes even more critical. And just start with the good trees to begin with that are disease resistant, and then you don't have to worry about it.
That extra $10 a tree doesn't look too bad when you're 5 years in and you lose all of them.
Yeah, or even 1 year in and you lose them like I am.
Yep. All right. Well, again, another side effect of this cold, damp spring, we need heat. I posted a couple pictures of my food plots, and some of my corn, both in the test plot and the NutriCrave, have, I don't know if it's worms or something, but I really need heat here. to get that corn going and outrun these bugs. I really don't want to spray an insecticide on it, but I'm worried. I'm worried it's cutworms, because them things come in and they'll wipe out a whole plot. So really keeping my fingers crossed on that. We need heat to get these plants going and going hard. I don't want a drought. I still want the moisture, but we sure need the heat. This 70-degree weather is just not helping us too much.
Well, we are supposed to get the heat here starting Saturday. So by the time this podcast releases, it's supposed to be well into the 80s, and then for most of next week as well.
Okay, let's take a break and listen to our friend Joe Miles, who I believe is in. Where's he at?
It's hard
Zimbabwe?
telling.
I think he's in Zimbabwe hunting a lion or something.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
Okay, before we get going too far in the properties that we enjoyed touring this year, I'm going to get Don. The June event is this week, folks. It's just in a few days.
Yeah, last call. This Tuesday, June 3rd, I'm going to be in Millersburg, Ohio at JB's Feed. The event starts at 5:30. I'll start talking at 6:30. There will be refreshments served. Please call ahead to let them know you're going to be there so they can make plans. 330-893-3684. Hope to see you all there.
I will unfortunately not be able to make it up, but I know you have it under control, and we promise we will not make Ray Miller get on stage. He's worried that if he comes, you're going to make him do it. So we might make Aiden.
I was going to say it might be Aiden's turn.
Yep, there we go. Aiden's squirming now. Well, you talked about this a while back. Why don't you, for those people who didn't hear that episode, let's talk a little bit about this next segment and properties that we want to discuss.
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do at the end of consulting season is reflect back on all the properties that I looked at. And if I could take my pick of any one of those for my own property, which one would I pick? And this year I did, I think 72, 73 properties. And, the interesting thing is I did more in my home state of Illinois this year than I typically do. And I do several in Illinois every year. But this year, of those 73 properties, 29 of them were in Illinois. And I kind of like that because I can sleep in my own bed in most of those. It might be a 2, 3, 4 hour drive, but I can get up early and go look at the property and get home that night and sleep in my own bed. But anyway, so I reflected back on all those properties and which one that I would pick if I could have one of those as my own. And there's actually, I'm going to describe my top 2 properties. And it just so happens that they're both in Illinois this year. And that I don't know if it's ever been the case in the past. But anyway, let's start with number 2. The second best property, and I'm not going to mention counties or anything where these was at because just out of respect for the clients. But I think when the client hears me describing their property, they're going to know which one I'm talking about. So number 2, it's a very isolated property. It's 80 acres on the side of it's just right off the side of the road, but the other side of the road has lots of deer cover. But this 80 on the other side it's not as isolated as I would like because all the deer's got to do is cross the road, and then they're into a lot of cover along this river that goes for miles and miles. But that road separating it makes a huge difference because a mature buck especially will learn that, hey, this side of the road, I'm safe. The other, I talk about having a physical feature around the sanctuary, and that road is a physical feature so that deer can learn when he's younger that this side of the road's safe, and by the time he's mature, he knows where to go when the heat's on. But This property was an old cattle pasture, one of my favorite types of cover, but there's enough open areas for a couple of really big food plots, all the food that we're going to need, but yet everything else is going to be in cover. And it's surrounded on 3 sides by open fields. So, you got open fields on 3 sides. Across the road is some cover, but I think we can get these deer to recognize where they need to stay. But the cover right now is really, really good on that property. I mean, we're going to enhance it a little bit with some switchgrass. We're going to do some screening along the road with some miscanthus and things like that. But I think if this client will go in there, and we've also just got some fantastic access, around the property, permission to come across those open fields from the neighbors, where we can pop right in with with the wind right in our face and hunt the edges. We can funnel those deer close to the edges in some different spots. And the big thing is we're going to be able to provide probably, I'm going to guess, at least 15 acres of food out of that 80. I think we're going to get some of the biggest deer from across the road that travel that river, especially late season. I think this place is really going to shine. Those deer are going to learn over time that this side of the road has undisturbed cover. They can stay there safe and never encounter people. And there's always an abundance of food there. I mean, we're going to plant fruit trees in the whole 9 yards, but we're going to have a couple of really big plots. And the good thing is how these 2 plots lay out is there's a beautiful funnel right between them that can be hunted with westerly winds. So as they transition from one plot to the other, there's a travel corridor. I mean, it's almost like a ridge saddle there that is a little bit open, but it's kind of narrow too. We're going to plant fruit trees there. So you're going to have one big plot, this little pinch point connecting the second plot, but in that pinch point is where we're going to put some fruit trees and some clover. And the great thing about it is you can hunt it with about any westerly wind. So that's an Illinois property, and I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm pretty sure that the client has been probably listening and knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if he doesn't, I'll throw this little tip out. He also owns some of the ground on the other side of the road. How about you, Terry? What, you got a number 2 or?
So number 2, this was the first time I've ever been tempted to break your rule and us hunt a client's property, because I could have made a deal on this one. And you talk about a property that could have an urban legend giant on it. I got a phone call from this guy. Actually, it's a property in Indiana, but our friend Dustin at Broken Rack Archery introduced us, and that's how I got connected. So thanks for the lead, Dustin. But crazy story. This property is almost 100 acres in the middle of a huge housing development. So the family owns the development company, and they all around the city, they have different properties that they buy and develop. Well, the second or third generation went off to college, got a job, but came back, and he's around 30 years old to work for the family business. And he's doing a lot of the bookkeeping of assets, and they ran across this property that they put on the back burner to develop, but never did. So literally there's houses, and I mean, huge neighborhood all the way around it. And Don, maybe 15, 16 years ago, they cut everything. And the road frontage is on the north. And just think of this, it's in hill country. So you have this ridge that comes down and J hooks around to the east. So they have access from the north. But where that jets around is like a city substation water treatment plant that he can walk in to get to from access from the northeast. There is a city park on the west side that he can park at the park and walk directly in on his property. And we went and talked to a neighbor, and on the south side, he can park at a guy's property and come in. Access from all sides of it, and it is thicker than thick because they took off the timber. And, we're going to make a street with subdivisions and cul-de-sacs and everything. All of that is clear but grown up. And the deer sign in here, Don, is unbelievable. So we mapped out, we picked our stand sites with our access points, and then I laid out this food plot system that goes around that spine, around that J hook, with the bedding, the sanctuary in the middle of that J, so they can come out, and he can hunt every wind. He's got at least 2, if not 3 stands for every wind direction, access from the outside, and we're going to have 14 acres of food in the middle of a housing development. And we got a bunch of deer, but over time, I think he's going to end up, if he doesn't already, he's going to have a giant in there. And it's going to be one of these stories that you hear on Facebook about, and believe it or not, it's not in the city. He can hunt with a gun in there.
Crazy. One thing that you said caught my attention, and that was that you can hunt it with every wind direction. And I want to throw this out there for the listeners. We go onto a property, a lot of times the client is expecting to be able to hunt with every wind direction, and that is not always the case. You can't force it. I mean, you're better off if you don't have a good stand for a north wind, and you're better off staying away when there's a north wind than you are trying to force the issue. And when you get a property that can be hunted with every wind direction, that's not all that common. Most properties, I would say, you don't see that, because, and it's usually due to access as much as anything, because you can't access from a certain direction. So if you have a certain wind, you got to just bust through a bunch of cover to get to where you need to be. So when you got a property that can be accessed from every direction and hunted with every wind, that's huge.
No tree stands on the property line here. You just got swing sets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable, man.
They're
almost 100 acres.
Whitetail are very adaptable, so I'm sure they'll get used to those kids screaming and hollering. But so my number one property, it's also in Illinois, and I'm also not going to say even the county or anywhere about where it's at. I'm even going to have to downplay some things here to not give it away, but let's just say, I don't even remember how many acres this property is, but I can look real quick on sitting here on my computer. That property would be, let me see here. Oh, I should have been better prepared for this. That property is 120 acres. Oh, here's the crazy thing about it, and I didn't even know such a thing existed in Illinois. So this guy's got 120 acres that is surrounded on 3 sides by, I'm just going to call it a huge sanctuary, and just leave it at that. And this huge sanctuary, no hunting is allowed. There's really very little human activity there. There is some agriculture that goes on there, but they harvest all the crops, and then they plow them under in the fall, whatever. And on the 120 that this property is, there's plenty of opportunity to provide food. And there's going to be 2 major food plots on this property. One of them is probably going to be 25 acres. But it lays out in such a way that the surrounding, I mean, it's like hunting a property that's probably 1,000+ acres, because that sanctuary, you don't own the sanctuary, you can't go into the sanctuary and hunt, but the deer can, and they don't have food, so somebody else is providing your sanctuary, and you've got plenty of opportunity to provide the food on your place. And there is plenty of cover there too, but I mean, the multiple access points. There's 2 different major food plots, so 2 people could hunt this property and not even see the same deer. I mean, this is the type of place that in the late season, when the deer get on these food sources, that this guy could see 20 to 30 bucks in an afternoon sit.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's just that big of an area around his property where no hunting is allowed. And this goes back to what I talk about a lot of times, that when guys looking to purchase a property, what lays around that property is way more important than what's on this property. If this property was surrounded by just, typical Midwest woodlots where hunting takes place, then it would not even be in probably my top 10 for the year. But the fact that it's surrounded on 3 sides by a giant sanctuary, with no food to speak of, and this property has the potential to provide lots of acres of food. It's just total game changer. So, I mean, if I was this guy, it would take an absolute giant for me to shoot it in November. I would just wait for the late season because
you don't know what's going to show up.
Exactly. I mean, he's going to be pulling deer that were not there in November. And it's just going to, I told him, I said, you need to save it. Make sure somebody in your group, his son was there the day I consulted, and a buddy as well. And I told him, I said, somebody needs a tag every late season because there's going to be bucks, multiple bucks show up on this farm every late season. And the sanctuary around it's what makes the property.
That's very cool. It's nice when sometimes properties hunt a lot smaller than they are because there's no access. But when you can have a property that hunts that much bigger, your property is a perfect example too. Your property hunts a lot bigger than what it really is.
Yeah, and I'm not surrounded by a huge sanctuary, but I am surrounded by open ag fields that gives me isolation. This property is totally different than my property. It's not one that you would just look at and say, well, that's going to be a great one. If you didn't know what surrounds this property, you wouldn't realize how good it really could be.
No. Well, my number one's going to shock a lot of people, and it's kind of hard to. I did so many good properties in Ohio this year. I did a lot of properties in Ohio. Part of that was you couldn't get out there, and I covered some for you, but so many awesome properties in Ohio. But I'm going to pick my number one as a 28-acre property in Kentucky. And it's going to shock people the reason why. And it comes down to isolation. This is not the type of property that's going to hold a family of 4 or a hunting club on it, but you could kill an absolute giant. It's an unfortunate situation because the landowner actually hired another well-known consultant to do this property, and the consultant came, took the money, and never gave him a plan. And I felt really bad for the guy. You talked to him first and said, well, maybe Terry can help you. And he was wanting to plant fruit trees and wanted miscanthus in and just didn't know where to do it. So I drove down one day to help him out. Just super great guy. But Don, when we have landowners that have equipment and a skill set to do like logging projects, they got excavators, dozers themselves, and they said, whatever you want to do, it's a clean slate. We start grinning a little bit, right? Because it takes a lot of that cost that some of our landowners, have to amateurize over a number of years. This guy had every tool that you could imagine. Unfortunately, when we started walking it, the access is from the north. And when the other consultant was there, that he had the sanctuary on the south and had 3 stands on the south property line. So they were tromping through the entire sanctuary to get to the south side. And his answer to that was, well, just go in there midday and set till evening. That was the answer for it. So we really started looking at it, and the isolation is there, but the access was kind of lacking. So we got in the truck after we started looking around, and we noticed that the property on the south side was a horse farmer. And the guy said she lived by herself. She didn't have a husband, but she raised horses. And I said, well, what about this pasture? Did they mow it for hay? And he goes, no, it just grows up. I was like, well, that's not good pasture for the horses. I said, let's go around there. I'm going to make a deal with her. And of course, he was kind of freaking out. So we knock on her door. I introduced myself and said that we were working on a habitat project next door. And I had a proposal for the lady. And she's like, well, what's that? I said, if we bush hog your pasture once a year, would you let us walk across your open field from the road and park right out here by the barn so that we can get into our property so we don't disturb the wildlife on there? We want to let them have a sanctuary and we're going to be hunting, but we don't want to bother them. We want them to be a safe place and not tromp it up. She lit up and she said, if you would bush hog my pasture just once a year, that would be such a blessing. And they kicked it off but it took the time to go over there and give her something in return. And Don, it completely changed this entire property. because now he has access all the way around, puts sanctuary right in the core. We did a soft edge in off the property line, and in this case we could hunt the property line, right? Because we had permission to. We went to that fence, went right up in a tree, and had an open buffer and then hard edge into real thick cut timber. It reminded me about the other property that you had, where you had Austin make the racetrack around the sanctuary. We did the same thing with it, put some barriers, dropped some trees, and then we ran a funnel right through the center of that sanctuary, right into this low area, out into a food plot with an orchard, had 2 360 blinds as pinch points on it. For a 28-acre property, he will be able to kill every buck in that neighborhood because there's no hunters, there's no cover, and because he went and tried to do something, offered to do something in return for that neighbor, I'm sure that relationship will continue to flourish, and all it's going to cost him is probably an hour to an hour and a half of bush hogging when he has his tractor over there anyway. So 28-acre property was probably my number one of the entire year.
You know, it's interesting that you say there was a consultant there ahead of you. I did at least 2 of those this year, where the client had recently had somebody consult and he didn't even get a plan in one case, didn't even get a written plan. But that's one of the things that I hear. One of the big complaints I hear is the plan is so, it either doesn't exist, they don't get one. I've had people tell me that the consultant took them to a restaurant after the tour of the property, made them buy lunch, and then told them to grab a paper napkin and start taking notes. That was their written part of their plan. Actually, I've had more than one person tell me that about the same consultant. I'm not here to bash consultants, but just trying to get the listener to understand that all consultants are not equal. And, you know, I was just listening to a guy today on social media. He's a consultant, and he actually puts out some good information. I agree with him probably 75-80% of the time. I agree with what he's saying. But he was consulting on this property, and he was making a rope scrape. I was kind of a little bit disappointed that he acted like he's the guy that came up with rope scrapes when I know he didn't. But that wasn't the issue I had with him. But he was describing why they put the rope scrape where they did, and how the deer come to this area. And he said, every time we come in here, we bump deer. He never one time in his video, said we're going to put our stand here. Never did show where the stand is going to be. He never did talk about the wind direction, how they're going to hunt it. He just thought this is a great place for a rope scrape because we always jump deer in here. And they made a rope scrape right there. Do I think deer will use that rope scrape? Absolutely, they're going to use it. But how is it going to help the client? How is that client going to take advantage of it? And
we don't want to ever bump deer. That's the
right,
whole purpose
absolutely.
of the thing.
And I just didn't get it. And again, this guy puts out a lot of great info. I agree with him most of the time. And, you know, most of the time he doesn't follow the, some of the stuff that, say, the industry follows. And he's a little bit of a wild card like I am when it comes to following the industry's lead. He marches to his own drummer, and I do as well. And I agree with a lot of what he says, but this time he was just totally off base. And I was thinking the whole time I'm watching this video, okay, I get it. Where are you going to put your stand, and how are you going to access that stand, and what wind direction are you going to hunt it with? And none of that was ever addressed. So I don't claim to be the smartest person on the planet. I don't claim to be the best at anything. But I do think when it comes to the plan that we give our clients, I don't think there's anybody out there that goes as far as we do with the written part of the plan. And especially yours, Terry. Your plans, of all the guys working under me, yours always take the most printed pages. Whenever I'm printing them out and reviewing them before I send them to the client, very detailed. And
my philosophy of that is it's in my best interest and the client's best interest to never have a question because there's so many details there. Mm-hmm. I want to address every aspect of this because we got a couple different types of clients. We have people who have family properties that it's going to be in their family forever. We got people who are just investing in a property and don't know a lot about it. And then we got guys that hire us and they know that it's going to be a 5-year plan and they're going to flip it. Well, I want that piece of documentation to be part of an ROI plan that is a longer term thing when they go to resell the property too.
Yeah.
So I want my plan to, I always have a follow-up call with every client. Now, we schedule it when we're there, but very, very rarely do we have a lot to talk about other than, hey, what does this little pin mean on the plan? What do you mean by this? I want so much data in there that they are assured of every aspect of the overall theme of the property and then how to implement it, even down to sometimes even a bill of material and a budget. But everybody's got their own way. The thing that bugs me is that guy drove in there, took that guy's money, told him to walk through his sanctuary to get to where he wanted to hunt. And but just don't walk in in the middle of the day. Well, that's when the deer are bedded down.
Yeah.
I mean, it just made no sense. And then took the guy's money and then wouldn't follow up with anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt so bad for the guy. He's a super great guy. But anyway, that's my number one. Shocking that out of all the properties that I looked at in such great areas. I did a property in Iowa. I did a property in Maryland on the Outer Banks. I mean, at 3 feet above sea level. It was the coolest thing I've ever done in
Yep.
and I'm talking giants. This is in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. for a good friend of mine. But a 28-acre property isolated in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky was my number one.
Well, the size of the property, I've been on some big properties that weren't near as good as some smaller properties I've been on. I was on one in southern Illinois this year it wasn't very big at all. I'm thinking it was about 20 acres. But if there's that client is going to be able to kill any deer that shows up on that 20 acres. And it just lays out in such a way that he's going to be able to have a nice food plot on one end of it. He's going to be pulling those deer away from the neighbors. His woods is going to be thick enough that he can get deer to bed on him. Does have some hunting pressure around him, but I think he can draw deer to bed on his property and feed on his property, and I think he can kill any deer that utilizes that property. But it's only 20 acres, and I would take that 20 acre over some 200 acres properties that I've looked at. And we've talked about this many times, that when we go and visit with a client, we do a plan, we do a lot of repeats. The client has had us out before. And every time we go back to look at a second or a third or a fourth property for a client, they just get better. I've looked at probably 5 or more properties for some clients, and every time I go back, the next property is better than the previous ones. And it doesn't matter if it's the second or the fifth. They just keep getting better because we're kind of educating them. A good example of that is Ray and Aiden. I've consulted with them on multiple properties, and I think they know enough now they don't even need to call me. They know pretty much what to do. And so we're not just setting up a property. We're kind of educating them on a hunting system. And once it clicks in their mind.
It's a philosophy.
Yeah. And once it clicks, then they know what to look for when they're buying a property, and then they know how to hunt the properties. And it makes them not only have a better property, but it makes them better hunters wherever they go.
Yeah. You said something there a minute ago that we probably need to make it part of our theme, especially when we bring all the consultants in June for our meeting. But you said something, and I think that's kind of my philosophy, is I can't control what deer are on a property. I can't necessarily control what neighbors do. I can't control the genetic pocket, the age structure, what the DNR does. But I think that our philosophy that you've kind of passed down to Wes and I and the other guys is when we go into a property, we provide a system to where they can kill any buck on the property they want. If they hunt it right. What buck that is their decision based on what their journey is. They might want to kill a 150-inch 3-year-old, and that's great. I'm going to celebrate with you. But if you hunt it the right way, have the opportunity to kill any buck on that property you want. And sometimes that's only with one wind direction, hunting 3 times a year. But if I could think of one thing that I want to provide to a client when I leave, it's not the guarantee that they're going to kill a booner or a 200 or a 150. That they're going to have the choice to target and kill any buck on that property when it comes through. And how we manage the neighbor situation is always a little strategic, but that's my goal. It's give them the choice to be able to shoot what they want as part of what part of their journey they're in. But yeah, you should be able to kill when you follow a plan that you have approved. You should be able to kill any buck on that property.
Well, and every property's got a ceiling, and the ceiling is different on every property. You could have two properties right down the road from each other, and one of them, the ceiling might be that guy can shoot a 150-inch deer every single year, and a mile down the road, the next guy, he's lucky to shoot a 120 every year. But what we wanted, and it might be because the one guy has worse neighbors than the other. So every property has a different ceiling based on a lot of different factors. And what we want to do is help that client reach that ceiling, whatever it is. There's places where that ceiling should be a booner every year. I've been on properties where I've told the client, you should be able to shoot a booner every year. The one I just described, either of those two properties I described as my number one and number two, I really believe that once they get the whole plan enacted and it's had a few years to mature, I think those guys should both kill booners almost every year, if not every year. And that's their ceiling. Right now, is that happening? It absolutely is not happening. Those properties aren't developed to that degree, but that's what we want to do, is help every client reach the ceiling, whatever it is for that property. And if there's a buck on that property, like you said, if there's any buck on that property, they should be able to shoot that buck if they want to. If he's spending any amount of time at all, they should have an opportunity in the course of a season to shoot that buck.
All right, well, we're already 47 minutes in. We knew that would take a long time. Let's kind of spin off of that a little bit for the Higgins hot seat question of the day. And this is brought to us by 360 Hunting Blinds, and my Chasing Giants 360 blind is here, but we're not going to install it until later in June because Mark and Merle are going to be traveling through Kentucky. They're going to actually come to our dealer event, and they're going to be there. We have a lot of common dealers between 360 and Real World. So they're going to come and visit with us, but they're going to stop in Kentucky, visit the Ark with their families, and then we're going to install my blind together and get some video footage of it going in and that type of stuff. So thanks to 360, but I'm really excited about everybody seeing where I've set up for my 360 Chasing Giants blind to go. Don, without naming names, without saying a location, the worst consulting experience with a client that you've ever had?
Well, there's one time when I showed up, and I don't think it's a bad experience. I think it's just the client had done so much more than my typical client. There was one time when I did the tour of the property, and I told the guy, I think you've done about all that can be done. I don't really think that I can offer you anything of value. I'm not going to charge you. I just shake your hand and wish you the best and walk away. And I've talked to the correspondent with this gentleman multiple times since then, so there was absolutely no hard feelings. But he had just done so much to funnel the deer past his stands, and he had a good food plot system in place and such. And there's one property that I just told the guy, I'm not taking your money because I don't think I could tell you something that's going to make a noticeable difference on your property. You've already done so much. And
I don't know many guys in this industry that would have done that.
Well,
they would have figured out something that they would have done to take their money.
My integrity's not for sale, and I would rather do that than to throw together some kind of ridiculous plan for the guy and he'd be disappointed. Now, I've had a few clients that they just scrapped my plan. I've heard through the grapevine, that this guy thought that your plan was too simple and it wasn't complicated enough, and that he just didn't see how it could work being as simple as it was. Well, some properties are very, very simple. They just are. And whatever plan I put out for any property, I look at it as if I own the property. Every time I go to a client's property, I think to myself, and my mindset is, I just bought this property, or this property was just given to me, or whatever. I just acquired permission on this property, and I can do whatever I want with it. That's what the plan I'm laying out. If I owned it, this is exactly what I would do. And that's the plan I lay out. And sometimes it's very complicated. I shouldn't say very complicated. I don't think any of my plans are real complicated, but sometimes it's very expensive. Put it that way.
Labor intensive.
Yeah, sometimes there's a lot of projects that cost a lot of money, and other times it's very cheap and there's little to do. Sometimes it's just a matter of opening their eyes to things like access and wind direction and how the bucks play the wind, and moving some stand locations, maybe changing how they go about their food plots or something like that. Maybe a TSI project to make the bedding cover different than other bedding cover in the neighborhood. It kind of frustrates me when somebody paid good money to get me on their property and do a plan, and I know in my mind the plan will work. I have no doubt whatsoever. You just do what I'm telling you, and your property's going to be better than it is. At what degree better, it varies from property to property. Sometimes it'll be 10 times better, and sometimes maybe just twice as good. But it's going to be better if you just follow the plan. Have some faith.
What was it, 2 years ago? I was with a client in Ohio, and I asked to step away and make a phone call because I wanted to go over something with you, and I called you, and I was like, this guy has argued with me for every single point that we're making, and he's never going to follow anything. And after I got done talking to you, I went back and said, you got it all figured out, buddy. I think you're better off just and I left. I was like, this guy is not worth dealing with. But yeah, it's interesting. But this isn't a commercial about our consulting business, but I will tell you, if you're considering using one of our guys, whether it's Don, myself, Wes, the other guys, go ahead and get in touch with us this summer so we can start building it. It's cheaper for the client if we can put a schedule in, so when we go to an area, we can do multiple visits in the same pocket and kind of plan our route accordingly. It gets a whole lot more expensive for the customer if we have to do all these little one-off trips. And I will say that we're working extremely hard that when you hire us as a consultant, we have pre-vetted partners that you're going to save money with their services that we've already trust. We already know them. That if you put one of our plans in together, the money you save because of the agreement that we bring to the table with our plan with these vendors, it more than pays for our consulting visit for the most part, depending on the size of their project. So we're putting those lists together of all of those, TSI people, fence guys, food plot guys, tree guys, pond guys, fish stocking guys. I mean, everything. We're vetting all of those people out, looking at their work, people that we trust, that we're willing to put our name on it. And when you get your plan, you get a list of those contacts of people that we approve and with special rates. And I'm telling you, you will pay for the consulting visit very easily once you implement one of these projects. So,
and also the discounts that we give through various companies, like Real World. Right. If you hire one of us, you get a discount with Real World products forever, as long as we own the company. And it's not just that year you did the visit. So,
you're part of the family at that point.
You'll save enough money to pay for your consulting visit.
Yeah. So reach out to us. It's just an ask. It makes it a lot easier. Even if you don't want to fully commit, get on the list so we at least know what we're dealing with and we're able to manage a whole lot better. It's a whole lot easier to manage your winter and your travel when we know what's going on ahead of time. Well, so with that, let's go ahead.
I can say that I'm planning to. I'm only planning to do about half the number of properties I did this winter, and I've already got a list of about a dozen. So if I cut that 70 in half, we're at 30 to 35. And the other thing is I want to be done by March 1st next year. I have not got to do a lot of time looking for shed antlers and such in the last several years because I'm out on the road. I'm going to try to be done by March 1st, and that's my plan anyway, and to do half the number of properties. So if you want me, for sure, you better call early because my list is filling up.
Yeah. All right, well, let's switch to our listener submitted questions. We're going to try to get a few in this episode, even though we're running a little long. Brought to us by Midwest Land Group. Again, folks, mass expansion in through the eastern side of the Midwest, Kentucky, Ohio, Mississippi, Alabama. If you're looking for a career, not only a property, but a career with a great faith-based organization that is truly a work family, reach out to Midwest Land Group. Great guys. Brian has been a huge supporter of us and the Lester's Feet Foundation for a long, long time. So we'll be right back with our first question.
Don't risk your most valuable asset with a part-time agent. Most real estate agents are part-time, working another job, trying to scratch together a few extra bucks in real estate as a side gig. Their inexperience will cost you thousands at closing. Not at Midwest Land Group. They only hire full-time professionals. Their agents are passionate about the outdoors, highly trained, and committed to maximizing the value of your land. If you're interested in selling your land, don't risk it with a part-time agent. Visit MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, the first question comes from Andy Hendricks from Anderson, South Carolina. It says, "Hey, Don and Terry, I have a half-acre Dixie Dozen food plot that is surrounded by fruit trees planted this spring. I want to plant some clover around the trees, but right now it's covered in mostly grass and weeds. Can I simply spray the grasses and broadcast clover seed in the fall, or is there a more effective method? Thanks as always for producing such great content. P.S. I sprayed some Mike's Mighty Micros on some potted and tubed oak trees, and most of them grew about 4 inches in the first week." Well, Andy, we get a lot of feedback about Mike's Mighty Micros like that, and appreciate you sharing that with us. But as far as establishing your clover in an area that's grass right now, you've got to kill that grass. It's absolutely got to be killed. And then broadcasting the clover seed into that, I'm going to say I won't say it won't work, but I will say there's a lot better ways. That clover seed needs to get some good seed-to-soil contact. Down in South Carolina, you're probably not doing much frost seeding, would be my guess, in the spring, and you're wanting a fall plant anyway. I would work that soil up and broadcast that seed and then cultipack it into the dirt. Run some kind of roller, even if you just have like a lawn roller for your yard behind a four-wheeler lawnmower. Broadcast that seed and then pack it in with that roller of some kind, cultipacker if you got one. That's going to work way better than just trying to broadcast into that dead grass and other vegetation.
Okay. Next one's up on the screen.
Next one comes from Jerry Sinclair from Mobile, Alabama. It says, "Hey guys, I recently listened to and appreciate the episode where you discussed biochar and humic acid and their benefits. I have an area where I would like to grow a plot, but the soil is absolutely terrible. If this was on your property, can you explain what you would do to make this specific spot a productive plot? Besides the soil amendment products you have discussed, what would you plant? I know it might take a few years, but I would like to get this soil to the point where one day I can grow a decent food plot. Thanks." So, Jerry, I would definitely give it a heavy dose of biochar at a rate of a full ton per acre, 2,000 pounds per acre, and work that into the ground in the first few inches. Whether you do that with a tiller, a disc, or whatever. And get that soil char, which lasts hundreds of years in the soil. And as you build nutrients, that's going to keep them nutrients up towards the top where the plants can better utilize it. I would also give it a heavy dose of humic acid, 300 pounds per acre. I would do that every other year for probably at least a decade. So that's what you want to do as far as soil amendments. Well, the other thing is if you've got access to manure from a local farm, I don't care if it's horse, cow, chicken, pig, I don't care what it is, I would get as much of that on the soil as you possibly can. If you could get it 6 inches deep and then work it into the first few inches of soil, that'd be fantastic. But building a layer of topsoil with a lot of vegetative matter is going to be your goal. That's what you're going to try to achieve. I would use crops to build that soil, build that organic matter every year. So in the spring, I would plant something that's going to have a lot of tonnage, things like sun hemp, for example, buckwheat, big plants. And then I would mow them off And then in the fall, I would plant something that's going to build the soil like turnips and radish, some bulb plant. And so that spring plot with those big plants like the sun hemp, it gets several feet tall, and there's just a lot of matter there. You mow that down and you got a layer of decaying vegetation on the ground. But then you plant those bulb plants like the groundhog radish and the turnips. Those bulbs, they always have that deep taproot right in the middle of that bulb coming down. And that taproot will bring nutrients from deep in the soil up closer to the surface. And then that bulb, once that plant dies the next spring or over the winter, that bulb will be decaying up there towards the surface. And after it's brought them nutrients up, and then you got the biochar and the humic acid to hold them nutrients, and you got that layer of decaying vegetation. And just repeat that process for several years and build that soil up. And again, manure is fantastic. If you can add manure to this whole process as well, that's the process I would go about trying to build a really poor soil. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with that on my farm, but I have seen situations like you're talking about where there's really no topsoil. Topsoil has been lost for one reason or another, be it through erosion or whatever, and there's just hardly anything growing there. Getting that decaying vegetative matter in the soil is going to be huge.
All right. Well, we're over an hour, but I want to get one more question done because this is relevant to the first beginning discussion about mixing up your mic. So let's talk about it real quick.
All right, this one comes from John Ziegler from Shoals, Indiana. Says, hello, gurus of the whitetail world. I guess he's talking about you, Terry.
Not me.
I ordered some Mike's Mighty Micros for my garden plants. The bottle says to use distilled water. There's a note on the product pamphlet that suggests well water isn't good, and also there's a suggestion that the tank used to spray the product can be a problem if it's a multi-use or a multi-purpose spray tank. Then Don created a short video on his own water system for use in plot spraying, whether for herbicide or soil amendment applications. I'd appreciate further discussion on the subject of tanks and water usage. Does this product, Mike's Mighty Micros, need a designated tank? Is it a waste of money to use this product if a person doesn't have a rainwater containment system, a reverse osmosis system, or a water distillery? Thank you for the podcast and for sharing the message of salvation through Christ. Well, John, great question, and I'd be glad to build on this topic just a little bit. So, Mike, I'm going to give you an explanation that Mike at Mike's Mighty Micros gave me a couple years ago. And I say all the time that a lot of the information that I share with you folks is stuff that other people have shared with me. I don't claim to be a genius or smarter than anybody else, but I do have a lot of smart people around me. And Terry being one of them. So Mike described to me, he says, you need to think of each water droplet as a little sponge. And just as with a sponge, each water droplet can only absorb so much of other nutrients. A sponge can only absorb so much water, and then that's all it can absorb. Well, each water molecule can only absorb so much of whatever. Chemical. It could be herbicide. It could be Mike's Mighty Micros. It could be a fertilizer, whatever. When you use well water, for example, a lot of wells here in the Midwest have a lot of iron in them. And if you would take a droplet of that water and put it on your car, for example, and then it evaporates, you can see where that water droplet was by the ring of iron, rusty colored iron that's left. That iron was in that water droplet. If you wash your car and you don't rinse the soap off good, and those water droplets with the soap dries, you got those little spots on your car. And if you're using well water or even tap water that's been treated with chlorine or whatever, some of the chemicals they treat that city water with, it cannot absorb your herbicide near as well, your Mike's Mighty Micros near as well. And rainwater is the purest water that you can get. Distilled water is good as well. So Mike got me to install the big tank that you've seen in the video where I'm collecting rainwater off my shed, and then I'm using that in my sprayer for everything, for my herbicides, for fertilizers, for whatever I'm putting on. I'm using rainwater. And the reason for it is each water molecule can absorb more of whatever it is I'm spraying. So is it going to, I think your question was, is it a waste of time to use tap water or well water? I wouldn't say it's a waste of time by any means. That water droplet is still going to be able to absorb some of whatever it is you're putting in it, some herbicides, some Mike's Mighty Micros or whatever, but it's just not going to be able to absorb as much. Yep. Using rainwater makes your herbicide more effective because each droplet has more of the herbicide in it. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's retouch on the tank situation too. We mentioned this earlier. If you're spraying your food plots with your herbicide or spraying your clover after you mow it, make sure you clean it out. That's the reason he's saying that. Mm-hmm. For your fruit trees, for your flower beds, for your vegetables in your garden, go spend $15 and buy a separate dedicated pump sprayer. But you can pour Mike's into any of your ag products while you're spraying it. But don't take that tank and spray your vegetables and your fruit trees with it. Separate that part of it, but treat it no different than, you switching from, I don't know what, 2,4 and Roundup. Don't mix your stuff up when you're doing it. I will say that what I started doing, I don't have a way to collect rainwater. I still use tap water for my herbicide applications and that. I don't have a choice. But what I do here at the house is we run a dehumidifier the entire summer. And we have the dehumidifier upstairs. It runs just to keep the humidity out of the house. And when I run low on my pump sprayer for the garden and the flower beds, I take that dehumidifier out and pour that in my little small pump sprayer that I use on our garden and use that on my fruit trees. So instead of buying distilled water, a lot of people run a dehumidifier. Don't be afraid to use that water that you've separated through that piece of that appliance. You can capture water off your AC unit. I've seen quite a few guys have the little pipe in their basement that goes down. Run that into a 5-gallon bucket and put that in your little small pump sprayer for your garden spray. I think that's a whole lot better than using especially well water, depending on how the quality of your water is.
Yeah, and I'll say that some chemicals that you would use in your sprayer leave more residue than others. And, like on my sprayer behind my tractor, I got a filter where it comes out, it goes into the pump. There's a filter there where sediment from various chemicals can settle in there in that filter. And then you go and you can flush out your tank, but there's still residue in that filter. And then on each of my nozzles, there's a little filter on each nozzle that can collect residue that will actually
every O-ring, every nozzle, every tip.
And just some chemicals are a whole lot worse than others. 2,4-D is one of the worst. I mean, that residue from that is just hard to get rid of. If you're just going to spray your plants, your fruit trees, your garden, whatever, just buy a sprayer. For Pete's sake, folks, at $15 you can have a nice, even up to a 3-gallon sprayer, and you're not ever worried about contamination.
I mean, I got 20 fruit trees and a big garden and a big flower bed, and that 1.5 gallons lasts me a long time when I'm misting everything. I mean, you don't use much of this product. But again, don't be afraid to buy the bigger jug of Mike's and put it in your normal sprayer for your herbicide application. You can dump that in with your ag product. But I don't want to use and cross-pollinate or contaminate anything with what I'm eating. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's a big full show for the 1st of June. Thanks everybody for the support. I want to make a quick mention of the Chasing Assurance podcast that airs here in a couple weeks. I had to put a preview episode out last Wednesday so I could get all of the mapping done for the podcast platform. So iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of that is mapped. So you can go ahead and subscribe if you're a Spotify person to that podcast. There's a segment from my dad from a past interview that I shared on that episode. But the first episode will drop on the 18th. For those who listen to MTech, I'm going to say something and I don't want it to be taken the wrong way because I fully appreciate and respect the folks at MTech for this decision. But I contacted them over the last couple of weeks, and they want to listen to a few of the episodes to make sure that it's doctrinally sound before they publish it on MTech. And I respect that, even though it's probably going to be a couple episodes before people will be able to hear it on MTech, to maintain the integrity of their platform and wanting to hear the product. I fully respect that. So we'll come up with a different plan for the time being. I will mention that this episode, should have said this at the beginning of the show, this episode will be followed up, the audio platform, with the first segment from the Shipshewana show at the Sportsman's Classic. The audio will follow Sunday Night Prayer Time, so make sure you stay on the end for that. The video version will air later this week on YouTube. So a lot going on, buddy. It's summertime, and we're not slowing down any.
No, in fact, I'm headed to Ohio this week. I hope to see you guys all there on the 3rd, Tuesday evening, and got a special message for you that I'm looking forward to share. So, anyway, God bless. We'll see you next week one way or another. Hopefully I'll see you in Ohio, but if I don't, I'll see you right back here.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
That's what this book, this holy, sacred book is about. God's spoken. He has revealed himself. So when a question of faith comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of morality comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of fellowship comes up, we ought to go to the Bible, because it's there in this inspired, infallible, inerrant book that we have an authoritative voice from heaven.
Have you ever questioned whether the sin in your life has maybe canceled out your purpose? Maybe you have bought into the lie that God could never love you, after you did whatever that was that you did. I think all of us have had moments of fear like that. And I want to kind of tell you a little bit of a story, because I think many of us struggle with thinking that if we do something bad enough, that when we go below the surface, we're never coming back up again, that we're done. And that is a lie from the pit of hell. So I want to kind of make the backdrop to this week's Sunday Night Prayer Time, one of my favorite locations in the world. And it's out of Seward, Alaska. You've got Resurrection Bay. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Hunt for Red October, that submarine that comes in the beginning with, Sean Connery was in the movie, that's Resurrection Bay. So my buddy had a 29-foot bayliner, and there was a few of us. We said, hey, let's take your boat out. Let's just do an overnight, halibut fishing trip. We'll head out toward the Chiswells out in the open ocean. Some really great halibut fishing out there. So we get everything packed up, and we're maybe 15 miles out. We pass Fox Island. We pass Kayakers Cove. It's just gorgeous, snow-covered peaks around here, and we're talking, late July here. So we get all the way out, and we're passing, pods of killer whales, and there's humpback whales, and there's Dall's porpoises that are swimming alongside the boat. Just incredible. And you're just thinking, God, how did you ever dream up all this stuff? So we get all the way out into the open ocean, and the unthinkable happens. We throw a bearing in the motor, and we're done. We're dead in the water. We lost electronics. We have no idea what had happened at this point. We just knew that we were in a lot of trouble. So he had a 9.9, trolling motor. For whatever reason, he had stuck it in the cabin. And so he throws it on the back because we had a 25-horse short shaft, but it wouldn't fit the bayliner. We had it for a Zodiac that we actually had tied down upside down up on the bow, that we thought, well, if we get out there, we might play around with it a little bit. Never thinking we'd end up having to use that. So we get the 9.9 on there, and we are headed anywhere to try to get out of this storm. And the closest land we can see is maybe 4 miles away. And we have to get all the way there. We're not on slack tide anymore like it was on our way out. We're now hitting some 2 to 3 foot rollers. And when you're using a 9.9 in that kind of water out in the open ocean, it's a whole different game. It's not like being on a little lake anymore. We finally find shore, and we see a place. It's called Three Hole Bay. So we all go all the way to the back of this bay because we had a storm coming in. We get anchored up. There was like an avalanche chute that was there, and it was maybe 200 feet deep, and there were some rocks from this avalanche chute that we evidently were able to kind of hook into with our anchor. figuring, we'll spend the night here. The next morning, some fishermen will come back in here. We'll flag them down. They'll go back, get help. They'll, send a boat. They'll tow us all the way back about 40 miles to Seward. Didn't happen. So it's day 1, day 2. By day 3, no one had found us yet. And we're thinking, you know what? We might need some extra food here. So we start fishing over the side. We're catching some ling cod. We're getting some of those yellow eye. They're bright orange fish. Incredible. We would catch one. And when they would get to the surface, their bladder would expand inside their midsection, and they would start to float. And you'd see the eagles come swooping down. And before you even knew they were coming, they would grab these yellow eyes and take off with them. Well, day 3, day 4, finally on day 5, there was a fishing boat from Miller's Landing. They're one of the locals. They're out of Seward. They see us back there. They're just looking for a new fishing spot. So they take my buddy, who was the captain. They said, listen, we'll go back, and we'll be back in about 24 hours, and we'll bring a little bigger boat. We'll tow you all the way back. So we said, hey, no big deal. So we go to bed that night. I'm laying in the cabin, thinking about God, hope no storms are coming in here. You need to watch over us. And so the next morning, I wake up, and Wade, now, my buddy Wade, he's the guy that if he ever says, hey, I got an idea, run. Well, he wakes up, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we get the Zodiac fully inflated? Let's take it off the bow. Let's kind of lower it down over the side. We'll get a little bit of lunch stuff with us. And he goes, let's go over to Holgate Glacier across the Ialic Bay here. He said it's like 12 miles. It's slack tide right now. We can probably be there in 30 minutes. Let's go over and do some filming, and maybe we can catch the glacier, calving or something. So we do. We get the boat loaded up. We get it up on step. We make it over there in about 30 minutes. Now, when we get to the fjord that's going back to Holgate Glacier, these fjords, over thousands of years of being, carved out, and you see these the toes of these glaciers just creating waterfalls coming out of the mountains. It's just like when you think about what heaven could possibly even look like. That would be my best guess. It's just something that it takes your breath away. So we get all the way back where we had to shut the motor off because we're going around these what we call bergy bits. These would be pieces of iceberg that may be the size of like a lazy boy chair, maybe a pickup truck, but you don't want to hit them, right? It'll break your prop off. Well, we didn't tell anybody, that we were going all the way back there. Mistake number 1. So we get all the way back. We get the oars out, shut the motor off, prop the tiller, get everything propped up, and we're rowing our way all the way back. And we get about 50 yards away from the face of Holgate Glacier. This is about 500 feet tall from the surface of the water to the top of the glacier. It's that big and probably runs that deep underneath it. Well, there's a stone formation that's probably about 30 feet tall, maybe 100 feet wide, out in front of Holgate Glacier. You can even look this up on Google Maps or something, and you can zoom in. You can see the rock I'm talking about. So we get there, and there's nothing to tie off on. So we pull the Zodiac up, jump out, get a rock, and put a rock on top of the rope, thinking that's going to be fine. There was slack tide right now. So we climb up to the top of this thing. And when we get up there, Wade has his tripod camera. He's setting it up on the far end, looking at the glacier, wanting to hopefully catch it calving at some point. And I'm going to be doing the side, the part of the video where I'm doing a teaching moment, a scriptural lesson or something. And as he's getting the camera rolling and getting some shots of this glacier with some small pieces coming off, I'm sitting there with my notebook, and I'm listening to the voice of God saying, God, what do you want me to teach on while we're here? And as I'm trying to come up with this message, I hear the voice of God, and I know that voice. If you have discernment and you know the Holy Spirit's voice as opposed to other voices like the lies of the enemy, it gets your attention. And at first I thought it was the enemy because I thought it was fear. Here we are, we've been stuck for 5 days. This is the 6th day. We're out here in the open ocean. No one knows where we are right now, and kind of iffy. And I hear this voice say, you need to go check on your boat. And I'm going, that's the enemy. And I just keep working on it. So I'm thinking, I'm going to talk about fear, how the enemy can get in our heads. And I hear the voice again, I want you to go check on your boat. And I'm telling the enemy, shut up. This is going to be a great lesson because I'm going to say, this is the voice of the enemy creating fear. We can trust God, all those things. 3rd time, I hear God speak to me. This is me. I want you to go check on your boat now. Well, one of the ways that we discern the voice, right, of the Holy Spirit and not the enemy is you have to look at the emotions that you're feeling when that thought hits you. if the emotions line up with the deeds of the flesh, things like worry, fear, rage, lust, we know that there's a lie twisted in with what we're thinking, and it's coming from the enemy. But if that thought, gives us things like peace, love, gentleness, kindness, faithfulness, self-control, we know that that is the word of God, speaking in us. So I realize this is the Holy Spirit. I don't say anything to Wade. I go, I'm going to go check on the boat. I don't know why. Maybe something's coming loose. And as I begin to go down the back side of this rock face, I hear the front of that whole glacier, like the size of Walmart, and that's how big it was, comes off, and it calves, right? The whole thing, face starts to fall off. So I'm hurrying, trying to get down to my boat. By the time I get there, about a 20-foot wall of water has wrapped around that whole rock that I'm on, and I just kind of like lay back against the rock, and I see it lift the entire Zodiac up in the air like this, and I see it pull the rope out, and there it goes. As soon as that wave is around, I get down in the water as fast as I can, throw my arms down in this probably 36-degree water, and I find the rope, and I don't know how I even got a hold of the end of it, but I finally got the tip of it, pull the thing back, and about that time, as I'm pulling this thing back up onto the rock, glacier calves again. Another same size wall of water comes wrapping around, and I'm holding onto this thing like a bucking bronco right now, as that Zodiac is just being pulled by the force of this wave wrapping around. It went so high, as a matter of fact, you could see the prop out of the back of the water as it lifted up. Well, I can't hold on to this thing much longer, and I know it's not going to stay, with a rock tied down on it. So I yelled to Wade, we got to go now. We got a problem here. He grabs the camera gear, we get down on the boat. Well, by the time we get out of this fjord, and we've been a few hours now, it's no longer slack tide. Now we have like 2 and 3 foot rollers going on, and we have to go 12 miles all the way back across Ayalik Bay to get back to where we need to be. It's so foggy we can't see anything. We're just trusting God that He's going to show us where to go, and we're just kind of blindly going, and it was raining so hard it felt like BBs hitting our face. And we get to the other side, but we're not sure where we are. Do we need to go to the left? Do we need to go to the right? And I remember on the way out there, I saw this rock formation look like a big keyhole. And I was thinking it looked like a tomb, like the stone was rolled away. And I saw that formation. I said, Wade, look to your left. We passed that. Go left. We go all the way around it, found our way back to Three Hole Bay, where we had anchored up. And the boat we were probably about 80 yards off of the water. Off of the rock face. It's really deep along those edges. It's just straight up cliffs. You can't get off. So the boat is drifting, and it's now about 30 yards away from this sheer cliff. And Wade's like, we got a problem here. I said, yeah, I know. The anchor's come loose. So he hits the tiller, gets me up to the side of the boat. He goes, see if you can find any more anchor rope underneath. So I jump off. I get in there. I go down in the hull, and I'm digging around. I found about 100 feet more of anchor rope. I come out and I tie this thing off on the edge on the boat, and I give Wade, I pulled the thing up. He's got the anchor. I said, get out there as far as you can go. It's so foggy. He gets out maybe 30, 40 yards. I can't see him anymore. I mean, he's almost at the end of the rope. But we needed that. It's like the angle, the dangle, right? You have to have a good angle. You can't just drop straight, or we're going to end up hitting the rocks. So he's trying to get the thing back out there again. Well, I hear him, hit reverse out there, and I hear this ping, and he sheared the pin, dead in the water. And all I hear coming through the fog is, whatever you do, don't let go of the rope. So I've got him, I'm pulling him back in. Had that thing sheared off out in the middle of Ayalik Bay, they'd have probably found us like 6 months later washing up on some Japanese beach. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong here. So I pull him all the way back in, and I said, we're just going to have to drop the anchor and just pray that it holds. So the two of us get up on the side of the boat as hard as we can, stern. We just take this thing and we throw it as far as we can. We have no clue what's going to happen here. It was getting dark out. We can't see the shore. We're dead in the water. Can't do anything here. We actually had kind of moved the Zodiac around to use as a bumper in case we would hit the rocks in the angle we were going. So it held. But we didn't know for how long. So we both crawled down, in the hull. We're going to try to get a little bit of sleep here before daylight comes up. This time of the day, you don't have very many hours of darkness. So I'm laying there in my bunk the whole night waiting. Because this is not an aluminum hulled boat, right? The Bayliner was fiberglass, not what you really want when you're going to be hitting rocks. Wake up the next morning, and I can hear the water still lapping by my head down in the hall. And I come up, and I look out, and there's the rope stretched taut the anchor had held. I think my message with all of this is there's going to be storms that are going to come in and out of our lives, always. Whether it's something that someone did to us or whether it's something that we've done, sometimes we wonder, how do we keep our head, above sea level? And the truth is, you can't. You don't have that kind of power. That comes only from the one who is in you, Christ in you. He really has taken all of our sin, and he has cast it as far as the east is from the west. And the beautiful thing is, he remembers it no more. I can't pay the penalty for my sin. I would be at the very bottom. People try to tell you, well, you know what, it's kind of like in the sinful life, it's kind of like you've fallen overboard and you need someone to throw you a life ring. Well, here's the problem with that. We're totally fallen. And it's like we have fallen off the side of the boat. We have gone all the way to the bottom. Our lungs are no longer working, and we have drowned in our sin. We can't do it on our own. But here's the beautiful thing. God is the only one who can save us. And I'm thinking about a verse right now. It just crossed my mind. That'd be Romans 3:22, where it says, this righteousness from God comes through faith in Christ Jesus to all who believe. How many is all? Everyone. It doesn't matter what your sin is, what your sin was, or what your sin will be. The moment that you received Christ, you weren't transformed. I hear people say that, well, you were No, transformation is a process through life. The closer we become to God, the more we line up with his priorities and his promises and his principles. That's a transformed life. It's like getting out a credit card debt. It takes time. The old behaviors, even though you have been washed clean of your sin, it takes time to change that old pattern of life. So then what happened the moment that you were saved is this. You weren't transformed. It's bigger than that. You were transfigured. The old has gone and the new has come. Therefore, your salvation is not up to you. You can't work hard enough to be able to get past all the sin that you've done. There is no way that you could ever pay enough price. It had to be Jesus. But here is the beautiful thing. God knew that. And that's why he sent his one and only Son to die for your sins. And you need to know something. No matter what your sin is, no matter what bottom has looked like in your life, Jesus is the anchor. And it truly is that the anchor holds. Father God, the enemy is a liar. And he is constantly wanting to create fear and anxiety and worry and doubt and lust and shame. But Father, you tell us in your word that therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I think about the Apostle Paul in Romans 7 when he's saying, I do the things I don't want to do, but it's not really me doing it. What's he talking about? He's talking about the real me is Christ in me. And that is where I'm totally righteous. And no one, no storm, not the enemy, can ever take away my righteousness, which is in Christ Jesus. Jesus is our anchor, and God, we thank you for that. So right now, as the guys are listening to this, as we wrap up, the enemy might be trying to say, yeah, but you don't know about this sin. And he's whispering, into your ear right now. Maybe you're addicted to porn. Maybe you've been having an affair. Whatever the thing is going on in your life, you need to know something. The anchor still holds. God knows what's going to be happening in your life tomorrow. And the beautiful thing is that even when we do hit bottom, we know that God is there. And so those challenges become gifts because we realize there is no way that we could ever do it except for the grace and the mercy of Jesus Christ. And that is what causes us to fall more in love, Father, with you every single day. Remind us who we really are, that what we really need is you. It's not these things that we run to. You are the only anchor. Help us to sink ourselves into your love, into your ways, into who we are as Christ being in us, and help us to live out of that place. Ask these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. You are loved, you guys. Take care.